Have you ever looked across the dinner table at the man you once adored and felt more frustration than fondness? It's a quiet shift, a slow erosion, and it rarely begins with something dramatic. No slammed doors, no shouted words, just a subtle silence, a growing gap. More and more women in their 60s, 70s, and beyond are experiencing it. They don't always say it out loud, but they feel it deeply. Resentment. It builds over time, almost invisibly. Not because their husbands are cruel or unfaithful, but because of something far more dangerous. Neglect, emotional distance, a refusal, or an inability to evolve together. You see, aging isn't just about the body. It's about relationships, too. And when one partner stays stuck in old patterns, while the other longs for something deeper, the result is quiet heartbreak. And it's more common than you think. Studies from the Institute for Family Studies show that gray divorce, separations after age 60, is rising faster than any other age group. Not because of infidelity, not because of abuse, but because of unspoken resentment that finally reaches a breaking point. That's why this video matters. Because today, we're going to uncover the 7 silent reasons women begin to resent their husbands as they age. Reasons that often go unnoticed until it's too late. We'll look at real behavioral patterns, emotional gaps, and subtle daily habits that quietly chip away at connection. You'll hear the stories of 2 couples, one who fell apart and one who grew closer, so you can see exactly where things go wrong and how to fix them, because it's never too late to rebuild love, but only if we first recognize what's being lost. So stay with me until the end. These aren't just theories, they're real truths that could save your relationship or the relationship of someone you love. And right now, comment number 1, if you're ready to go deep and face these truths head on. Let's start with something many people overlook, especially men. In the early years of marriage, emotional presence often comes naturally. There are conversations late into the night, shared dreams, spontaneous touches, and the steady rhythm of feeling truly seen by one another. But as the years stretch on, something changes. For many men, silence begins to feel like safety. Predictability becomes their comfort zone. They stop asking questions, stop offering thoughts. They retreat, not into anger, but into habit, into routine. That's exactly what happened to Frank. In the first decades of his marriage to Eleanor, he was steady, reliable, and present. But once the kids were grown and the workdays ended, Frank grew quieter, not cruel, not distant in any obvious way, just quiet. He'd sit in his chair for hours, flipping through channels. He'd answer Eleanor with a nod or a grunt, and, little by little, the silence between them stopped feeling peaceful and started feeling like rejection. Eleanor didn't want drama. She didn't need grand declarations. She simply wanted to feel that her thoughts still mattered, that her presence still stirred something in him. But Frank, like many men his age, confused emotional detachment with emotional strength. David, on the other hand, understood something different. He wasn't a man of many words, but he was present. When Margaret talked about her worries, her health, their aging friends, the future, he didn't offer solutions. He just listened. He held her hand. He stayed connected. That presence, that simple act of being emotionally available, made all the difference. Science backs this up. Studies from the University of California show that emotional responsiveness, especially in older couples, has a direct correlation with relationship satisfaction and lower rates of depression in women. Emotional presence isn't about being perfect. It's about being there, not just in the room, but in the heart. Now, moving to the second factor that silently affects longevity, not just of life, but of love. In the early years, many women carry the mental weight of managing a household. They remember the birthdays, plan the meals, keep the doctor's appointments in order. And for a time, it works, because it's shared with the chaos of raising children or building careers. But in retirement, when the noise quiets, the imbalance often grows louder. Frank never really noticed how much Eleanor did. Not because he didn't care, but because he never had to. She cooked, cleaned, managed the calendar, kept track of their grandchildren's schedules. Even after both had retired, the rhythm of their marriage didn't change. He assumed the home ran on autopilot, never realizing the silent toll it took on her. Eleanor began to feel more like a manager than a wife. She wasn't angry at the tasks themselves, but at the loneliness of doing them without recognition, without partnership. What once felt like love now felt like labor. David, on the other hand, made small but powerful shifts. He didn't suddenly become a gourmet chef or a household expert, but he started asking Margaret, "What do you need help with today?" He learned how to make her tea the way she liked. He took over small responsibilities, not perfectly, but intentionally. That intention spoke volumes. It said, "I see you. I value what you do. Let me carry part of this with you." A study published in the Journal of Marriage and Family found that older couples who share domestic responsibilities report significantly higher marital satisfaction, especially among women. The reason? It's not just about fairness. It's about feeling like your life partner still sees themselves as your partner. When tasks become unequal, so does affection. And over time, that imbalance turns into quiet resentment. Another habit that often gets ignored is the slow, almost imperceptible fading of physical affection and intimacy. It doesn't happen in a single moment. There's no dramatic ending, no conscious decision, just a gradual pulling away. A kiss not given, a hand not held, a touch that never comes. For Eleanor, the silence in her marriage wasn't just emotional, it was physical. In their younger years, Frank had been affectionate in quiet, steady ways. A gentle hand on her back, a kiss on the forehead, a warm arm around her as they drifted to sleep. But now, the distance between them in bed seemed to grow wider each year. It wasn't about sex. It was about connection. About the little moments that once made her feel chosen, cherished. Now Frank barely touched her. Not out of malice, but out of habit. He had stopped seeing those gestures as necessary. To Eleanor, it felt like a part of her was disappearing. Margaret, meanwhile, still felt desired, not in the way of young lovers, but in a deeper, more enduring way. David would still reach for her hand during their walks. He'd kiss her gently on the cheek before bed. They didn't talk about passion, but they practiced tenderness. Those gestures weren't grand, they were constant. And they reminded Margaret that she was still loved, not for who she had been, but for who she still was. Physical affection, especially in older age, is often dismissed. But according to research from the National Institutes of Health, physical touch remains one of the most powerful ways to maintain emotional closeness in later life. It lowers stress, reduces inflammation, and most importantly, it sustains the feeling of being connected. Without affection, couples don't just grow old, they grow apart. Here's the fourth behavior that slowly undermines your health. Not just emotional health, but the health of your connection. It begins with a small sigh, a subtle eye roll, a well-meaning, "Don't worry about it," when worry is exactly what needs to be heard. Many older men were raised to believe that emotions are private battles, that speaking of sadness, fear, or longing is a sign of weakness. And so, when their wives open up, when they express vulnerability, or share what keeps them up at night, the response they often receive is silence or dismissal. That's what Eleanor faced, again and again. She would try to speak to Frank about her fears of growing older, of losing friends, of feeling irrelevant. He'd nod vaguely, change the subject, or worse, offer solutions she never asked for. What she wanted wasn't advice. She wanted understanding, presence, just a moment of being felt. But Frank never learned how to sit with emotion, his or hers, so he shut it down. And with every ignored feeling, Eleanor's resentment grew deeper. Not because Frank was unkind, but because he was unreachable. David, however, had learned something precious: the power of stillness. When Margaret spoke about her fears, he didn't rush to fix them. He stayed with her in the discomfort. He said things like, "I understand," or "That must be hard." He didn't always have answers, but he had presence. And sometimes, that's the only answer we really need. Emotional invalidation, especially over time, can quietly destroy intimacy. A study from the University of Rochester found that couples who engage in open emotional communication are significantly more resilient during life transitions, especially in older adulthood. It's not about solving problems. It's about staying in the room when the heart opens. As we move forward, there's a fifth pattern that deserves attention, one that sneaks in slowly, often disguised as comfort. It's the quiet death of curiosity. In the beginning, most couples are explorers of the world, of life, of each other. They ask questions, they try new things, they wonder together. But somewhere along the path of aging, many men stop being curious, not just about life, but about their partner's inner world. Frank no longer asked Eleanor what she was reading. He stopped listening when she shared something she learned or felt. He wasn't unkind, he was just indifferent. Somewhere deep inside, he had decided there was nothing new left to know. About her, about life, about himself. And that decision, though never spoken aloud, felt like a wall. To Eleanor, it was heartbreaking, because she was still growing, still changing. She had fears, dreams, new ideas, and the man beside her no longer seemed to care. David was different. He asked Margaret questions about her thoughts, her memories, even her opinions on the documentary they had just watched. He encouraged her to try new things and joined her when she did. They weren't chasing adventures, they were chasing connection, together. That shared curiosity kept their relationship alive. It gave their days energy, their conversations meaning. Research from Stanford University shows that couples who continue to grow together through shared interests, learning, or even small daily experiences report higher levels of emotional fulfillment and cognitive vitality well into their 80s. When curiosity dies, connection decays. But when we stay interested in each other, we stay alive, not just as individuals, but as partners. Let me share the sixth reason why many fail to maintain good health, not only in the body, but in their relationships. It happens slowly. Skipped checkup, a growing belly, stains on the shirt that stay through dinner, a refusal to see the doctor or even to trim the nails. For many women, watching their husbands neglect their own health is more than frustrating. It's deeply painful. Because behind every silent act of disregard is a message. I don't care enough to stay here with you. Frank had always been practical, but as he aged, he became passive. He stopped going to the dentist, ignored his back pain, ate whatever was easy. His clothes grew looser, then tighter, then just unkempt. Eleanor tried to gently suggest changes, but he waved her off. To her, it felt like he was giving up, not just on himself, but on the life they still had together. She began to feel like a caretaker, not a partner. Like she had to pull him through life, rather than walk beside him. The resentment wasn't about vanity, it was about grief. Grief for the man who once took pride in himself. Grief for the future they were supposed to still enjoy. David saw things differently. He understood that taking care of his body wasn't just for him, it was an act of love. He stayed active, ate with intention, and kept up with appointments. Not perfectly, not obsessively, but consistently, because he knew that Margaret still wanted him present, mind, body, and soul. Science supports this. According to the Mayo Clinic, couples where both partners engage in preventive health practices live not only longer lives, but better ones, marked by lower stress and higher relationship satisfaction. Neglect isn't just about health. It's about what we're telling the person beside us, that we plan to stick around, that we still care, that they're still worth showing up for. Finally, there's one last habit that might surprise you. Not because it's rare, but because it's so ordinary we often stop noticing it. It's the quiet act of taking her for granted. In long-term relationships, familiarity can become a double-edged sword. The routines, the shared memories, the rituals, they create comfort. But they can also breed invisibility. What was once met with gratitude becomes expected, and without realizing it, many men stop saying thank you, stop noticing, stop appreciating. Frank never meant to take Eleanor for granted, but he did. He didn't notice the meals anymore. Didn't say a word when she spent hours organizing their medications or scheduling their appointments. He assumed she'd handle the bills, remember the birthdays, keep everything in order. And the worst part? He believed that silence meant peace. That if there was no complaint, there was no problem. But for Eleanor, that silence screamed. It screamed that her efforts no longer mattered. That her love had become a duty. That her presence had faded into the background of his life. David still made a point to thank Margaret. For the tea. For the little reminders. For just being there. He'd leave her small notes. Compliment her. Scarf. Tell her she made his day better. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was about recognition. It was about saying, I still see you. According to a study from the University of Georgia, expressions of gratitude in older couples are one of the strongest predictors of long-term relationship satisfaction. Why? Because we all need to feel valued, especially by the one we've walked through decades with. Taking her for granted isn't just about forgetting to say thank you. It's about forgetting that love still needs to be nurtured. So, here we are. You've just walked through 7 quiet shifts, 7 subtle habits that, over time, can unravel the bond of a lifelong partnership. Not with shouting or scandal, but with silence, with small choices repeated over years, with the slow fading of presence, effort, gratitude. Frank and Eleanor's story isn't rare. In fact, it's painfully common. A marriage built on love. worn down not by betrayal, but by neglect. Eleanor didn't stop loving Frank overnight. She simply got tired. Tired of carrying the weight alone. Tired of not being seen. But David and Margaret remind us of something powerful. That love doesn't retire. It doesn't age out. It doesn't stop needing touch, words, effort. They show us that even after 5 decades, it's possible to grow toward each other, not just alongside. The difference between the two couples wasn't personality. It wasn't money. It wasn't even health. It was intention. Because every day, whether we mean to or not, we choose how we show up. We choose whether to listen or turn away, to touch or stay distant, to be curious or closed. We choose whether to stay emotionally present or let the person beside us disappear in plain sight. If you're still here, it means you care. And that matters. Because it's not too late. Not too late to ask, how are you feeling today? Not too late to say, I see what you do and I'm grateful. Not too late to reach for a hand you haven't held in a while. Not too late to rebuild something that time has tried to erode. The truth is, women don't start resenting their husbands because of one moment. It happens slowly, when no one is looking. But healing can begin just as quietly, with one small change, one act of presence, one moment of choosing love again. If this resonated with you, if it stirred something in your heart, then do one more thing before you go. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, start a conversation. And if you believe more people need to hear this, then like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because these stories matter. And sometimes hearing the truth, spoken plainly without blame or bitterness, is what finally opens the door to change.